Pete smiled as he took the phone from his daughter. He was aware of the probable content of the call, yet he was eager to converse with his wife for the first time that morning. His wife, Jones, said, "Hey, baby. Can my sweet teddy bear oversee a dozen teenagers today?" Eva and her friends had been planning this for weeks. "I just need to follow their instructions. They are 19 or 20, not toddlers." She asked, "Did you get the pool set up the way she wanted?" He replied, "Yes, and the L chairs and bar. Furthermore, the food has been prepared. I completed these tasks while you were absent. Next year, you will be the designated chaperone. I am certain that you are eagerly anticipating spending the afternoon surrounded by a dozen teenagers and bikinis. By the time I return, you will be fully prepared. It is important to remember that one of them is our daughter, and two are like surrogate daughters. I am always ready for you, and I am confident that you feel the same way. Did you have a pleasant trip?" "We did." She replied that it had been a beneficial learning experience. Joanne had been employed by a medium-sized investment firm in a Nashville suburb as a senior investment advisor for approximately 6 years. "That's commendable," she said. "Have a safe trip back from San Jose. I'll see you later this afternoon." "I love you," said Joan. "I love you too," replied Pete. Eva rolled her eyes at her father, but was pleased that her parents still loved each other. Pete reflected on how he had been her lover until the children were born, and then her father until their eldest child went to. In the context of higher education, he now served as her primary source of emotional support. She was comfortable with this arrangement, as she enjoyed spending time with him and sleeping with her teddy bear. Pete, her father, and her two closest friends had been occupied with preparations for the upcoming party. Eva was about to embark on her third year of medical studies at Vanderbilt University, situated approximately 20 miles from her parents' residence in Franklin, Tennessee. She resided in an on-campus apartment with her closest friends, Lily and Carrie. The previous night, Lily, a tall and slender woman with light pecan skin and long curly hair, had stayed over, and she was present that morning to assist with preparations. Pete was of African-American descent with light pecan skin and long curly hair. He teased her for being shorter, but nevertheless loved having her around, as she was like another daughter to him. She ran track at Vanderbilt on an athletic scholarship and was majoring in mathematics and computer science. Carrie, the first friend Eva made in elementary school, gained admission to Vanderbilt with the help of her parents' financial resources and connections, despite her SAT score. She was a diminutive blonde, standing at only 5 feet 2 inches. In high school, she was voted most likely to buy an island. The pavilion and outdoor kitchen were constructed by Pete, who had also prepared the lunch menu. Friends were expected to arrive imminently, and the weather was clement. Eva, who had inherited her mother's organizational abilities, had kept her father occupied. Pete Moore, who was more reserved than brash, had established and managed his modest consulting firm. If a poll were held among the girls' fathers on the best dad, Pete would likely emerge victorious. After serving food and drinks, Pete said, "Ladies, I'm going back inside. Let me know if you require anything." Lily inquired as to whether he was certain that he did not wish to remain and partake in the meal with them. "This is for all of you," she said. "I am fine." This afternoon was for the girls. Pete remained occupied in his office, which overlooked the pavilion and pool. When the girls began to remove their coverings, he relocated to the den to watch the Braves game, avoiding any appearance of being a creeper. After approximately 20 minutes, he heard a commotion by the pool. Upon investigating, he observed a large young man grasping the car's wrist and attempting to pull her away. Her friend surrounded them, yelling for him to stop. Pete ran outside, yelling, "Hey, let her go." The guy, approximately 6 feet 3 inches, smirked and continued to drag Carrie, who was much smaller in stature. As Pete approached, the guy pushed Lily, causing her to stumble into Pete. Pete then blocked the gate, preventing the guy from escaping. "Let me go," Carrie yelled. The other girls stepped back but did not go far. Some were filming the incident. I attempted to intervene, saying, "Let her go, Pete." However, Ricky was unfazed and continued to jab at Pete. Pete then delivered a blow to Ricky's solar plexus, prompting him to release Carrie. Pete then proceeded to strike Ricky in the groin, causing him to collapse to his knees. "Get out of my backyard," Ricky demanded, his voice laced with menace. "You aren't as big as my old man said." I'm going to enjoy this. Ricky swung again, but Pete evaded the attack and tripped him, sending him to the ground. Just leave, Pete instructed, his voice firm. I don't want to hurt you, Pete, Carrie interjected, her tone conciliatory. The girls, however, found the scene amusing. Ricky, for his part, mocked Pete, calling him a little teddy bear. Pete was subsequently assaulted, but he was now enraged. He evaded the attack and proceeded to deliver a series of punches to Ricky's side. Ricky collapsed, taking a considerable amount of time to regain his composure. Pete then proceeded to restrain Ricky by securing his arm behind his back and escorting him out of the premises. Ricky, who was now in a state of distress, resorted to taunting Pete about his wife. However, Pete was quick to dismiss the taunts as baseless accusations and issued a threat directed at Ricky, warning him against further provocation. Ricky, in a state of evident distress, proceeded to bang on the car, causing significant damage to the exterior. He then slumped into his BMW and departed, leaving the girls who had been filming and making gestures at Ricky. Pete, in a calm and composed manner, informed them that the show was over. Once inside, please refrain from sharing the video until we have discussed it. Let us first examine the footage. Pete had heard Eva say, "Daddy, your nose is bleeding." Lily promptly assumed control of the situation, ordering everyone to clear a space for Pete on the sofa in the lounge area. She instructed Carrie to get a bag of ice and helped Pete sit down, using his shirt to apply pressure to his nose. The other girls, surprised by Pete's physical prowess, eagerly offered assistance. However, Lily maintained control of the situation, ensuring that one girl got him a drink. While one individual attempted to assist him in assuming a recumbent position, the remainder of the group engaged in discourse regarding the preceding events, directing their attention towards Pete when Carrie and Eva returned. Pete applied ice to the affected area and inquired as to the identity of the individual in question. Carrie identified the individual as Ricky Farmington, son of her mother's superior, Andrew Farmington. Pete's concern intensified as he contemplated the possibility that the accusations might have some merit. Carrie proceeded to explain that Farmington had extended another invitation for a date after a single encounter, which she had declined. "I'm sorry he came here. He probably saw the party on social media." She implored her friends to cease posting about their plans. Then she inquired of Pete how his nose had begun to bleed. He had never touched her. Pete replied that it had occurred when he had attempted to catch Lily, who had bumped into him and caused his nose to bleed. He smiled at Lily and said, "I'm so sorry, Dad. When I pushed you, I didn't intend to bump your nose." Pete reassured her, saying, "Don't worry. It's not broken. It's just a little bruised." Lily felt relieved but also concerned about the videos. Pete requested that the group refrain from sharing videos of the incident. He explained that social media emails and texts should be avoided, as they could potentially lead to the spread of rumors about his mother. He also highlighted the risk of retaliation from Ricky, who might become dangerous if the video were to become public. Aya inquired about the possibility of contacting the police. Pete confirmed that, while there were no immediate charges, the incident constituted assault and attempted assault, as well as damage to property. He requested that someone take their statements. He inquired of Carrie whether her wrist was all right. She replied in the affirmative, stating that it was just a bruise and that it was not serious. Pete nodded. Carrie then asked Mr. C where he had learned to fight like that. Rick was a big guy and had won several fights. Carrie commented that it was kind of boring. She then inquired as to whether she really wanted to hear this. A dozen bikini-clad girls nodded eagerly. Pete shrugged. He explained that he had been teased about his height in high school. He stated that both his parents were short and that he had therefore known from an early age that he would not grow much. "I participated in track and cross-country events, achieving a commendable level of proficiency in the state finals. On one occasion during my junior year, I had a date that was unfortunately mistreated by a couple of individuals. I initially attempted to ignore them, but they persisted in their actions, resulting in physical contact. My friend intervened, and the perpetrators subsequently departed. I informed my father, who subsequently located a martial arts studio in Knoxville for me. He advised me to strive for excellence in self-defense. I trained twice a week until I entered college at Georgia Tech, where I continued to expand my knowledge of various martial arts, including Sambo, Judo, and Jiu-Jitsu. Jiu-Jitsu is a martial art that focuses on self-defense. In terms of self-defense, the instructor was an older gentleman of a similar height to me, and his daughter, Eva, was of a similar size. They were both highly skilled fighters, and I trained with them for 4 years. When I married Joan, we lived in Atlanta, and I reduced my training to once a week. When Eva started college, I found a local studio and began studying again. My skills have not returned to their previous level, but I am still able to defend myself. Eva said, "Daddy, I never knew you didn't need to remember when we took you and Donnie to Paris when you were in 7th grade. We went to that Moroccan restaurant in a shady part of the city was not one that I wished to visit, as it appeared to be unsafe. However, your mother was insistent on returning to the vehicle. On our way back, 2 males approached us. One was tall, the other short. They demanded that your mother hand over the keys and instruct you to drive the vehicle and honk the horn. She nodded in agreement. The males proceeded to verbally abuse us, demanding that we stop. Your mother then instructed me to take us to the vehicle. The taller male produced a knife and demanded money. I feigned disinterest in starting a conflict, but then proceeded to disarm him by stabbing his knee. The shorter male then produced a knife, but I was also able to disarm him. Their companions commenced a pursuit, therefore I proceeded to the vehicle your mother had positioned on the roadside, prepared to depart. I entered the vehicle and we accelerated. This was the only other occasion I had encountered a similar situation. Pete had not disclosed the entire truth on one occasion following the birth of Donnie and Eva. He and Joan had been socializing in Atlanta when Joan's former partner, Bobby Taylor, a professional American football player, approached them. Joan did not attach any significance to the encounter, but when she accepted Taylor's invitation to dance, Pete subsequently followed Bobby to the restroom, where Bobby made comments about missing Joan. Pete was incensed when Bobby attempted to push past him, resulting in a physical altercation. Bobby sustained injuries, leading to the deterioration of his career prospects and eventual trade. No charges were filed. Pete addressed Eva's friends, requesting that they refrain from sharing the video in question. He stipulated that there should be precisely 13 copies, including his own, and no more. The girls assured him that they would adhere to this request. Pete also sought to distance himself from the actions of Lily, who had jested that he was an A-. Pete smiled as the girls laughed. He proceeded to call the police, and upon their arrival, the girls hastily covered themselves and provided an account of the incident. The officer then proceeded to examine the girl's wrist, which was red but not severely injured. Pete's nose had ceased bleeding, and the girl's mother had arrived at the scene. The discussion lasted approximately 30 to 40 minutes, after which the police departed. Once they were gone, the party resumed. Carrie embraced her mother and watched her leave, while Eva inquired about staying at the location. We proceeded to Carr's residence, where we planned to engage in dancing following the dinner. However, we decided to forego that plan and dance here that night. "Eva, I am delighted to have you here." She embraced him and rejoined her companions. Pete observed the conclusion of the Braves game, during which they were losing. He received a text message indicating that their flight was delayed and would arrive home late. He exhaled, experiencing unease about Ricky's words. Pete engaged in dancing with a greater number of Eva's friends, who attempted to instruct him in the steps of the electric slide, much to their amusement. The dancing concluded at approximately 10 p.m. They subsequently departed for Carrie's. Pete was greeted with hugs and expressions of gratitude from the cleaning staff outside. He heard the garage door open and subsequently assisted Joan with her bag, receiving further displays of affection in return. He inquired as to her well-being and was informed that she had missed him. She proceeded to recount the details of the party, which she had found intriguing. Pete was then informed that they had just left for Carrie's. They proceeded to engage in a series of dance performances, ultimately selecting this particular location for their display. From an internal vantage point, I observed their movements. Lily then proceeded to escort me to an external location, where I engaged in a series of dance performances with the majority of the group. Given my current level of fatigue, I would have been inclined to reciprocate their actions. However, Pete was not in the mood for such activities. I offered to assist him by retrieving his belongings and providing him with a glass of wine. I then proceeded to recount a series of events that had transpired. Curious, Joan followed him in and sat opposite him, sipping her wine. She observed that this must be a serious matter. Pete proceeded to recount the incident, omitting Ricky's comments. Joan was shocked to learn that someone would attack Carrie, a seemingly gentle individual, when Pete revealed that the assailant was Ricky Farmington, Andrew's son. Joan was incredulous. It is inconceivable that such a mistake could be made, she added. It is evident that Andrew neglected to impart certain vital lessons to Ricky. Joan emitted a brief, mirthful laugh. You took Ricky out with my husband, who is a veritable 165-pound punch that could tank any attack. What is the joke? She inquired, her tone indicating her difficulty in believing that Pete was not amused. Joan observed his expression, which betrayed a hint of disappointment, and said, "Oh, come on, Pete. I'm not." He was attempting to cause her emotional distress, but she was realistic in her assessment of the situation. How else could he have taken it? She was shocked when he said, "Don't bother." She proceeded to the kitchen and called to him, but he did not respond. He was not in their bedroom, he was in a guest room. She asked Pete, "What are you doing here?" "What are you doing in here?" "I missed you and wanted to snuggle with my teddy bear tonight." Teddy bear. He wondered if the nickname was affectionate or mocking. He was too tired to argue and said, "Guess we'll both be disappointed." He closed and locked the door after a few minutes of knocking and pleading. She left confused and Pete was of the opinion that his wife's husband was losing his mind. The following morning, Pete was aware that his wife would sleep late after her long flight. He was irritated by the possibility that she had not even gone on the trip. He surreptitiously entered their bedroom for his running clothes, ate a small breakfast, and went for a long run. 7 miles later, he returned. Joan looked unhappy. "Mr. Smith, we must discuss the matter further. I believe you may have withheld some information from me last night." He ignored her and proceeded to shower and dress. Afterwards, he went to his office, where Joan was waiting. Andrew called Ricky, who had blood in his urine, and went to the emergency room. Ricky informed Andrew that he had been shot. Pete replied that he was lying and that he was embarrassed. Andrew was enraged and demanded to know why Pete had attacked him. He explained that the individual in question was someone they had known and loved for over a decade. Andrew continued, stating that the individual had been physically removing another person from their property. "Did you believe their account of events over mine? Do you think I sucker punched him?" Joan said, "I'm sorry, Pete. I just can't believe you could do that, face to face." Pete was frustrated. "So you think I couldn't handle him face to face? No offense, honey, but he's huge. Remember, Paris, you were running from that little guy. The individual who had been pursuing me after I had dealt with the larger individual realized that she doubted him. She continued, "Do you know how difficult this will make things for me?" Pete was surprised. He asked, "What was I supposed to do? Use a weapon?" "My hands." He replied, "Nonsense. I've seen you work out. How could you hurt Ricky? With just your hands." "I appreciate the confidence." That was sarcasm. "I am unsure what I should tell Andrew. Perhaps it would be best for his son to apologize to Carrie and me." "That will not. Ricky said he did nothing wrong. I am perplexed by your belief in his innocence over that of your husband." As they proceeded on their journey, Joan's face displayed a flushed complexion, indicating her desire to respond, but she was prevented from doing so when a vehicle drew up and sounded its horn. The travelers were relieved to see that Eva, Lily, Carrie and her father, Brian, had arrived in Bentley. The girls embraced Pete and Joan, and then Brian shook Pete's hand. Pete thanked Brian for looking after Carrie, indicating that he considered this a significant gesture of support. However, Pete was visibly uncomfortable with the praise, displaying a lack of confidence in his ability to reciprocate. "We love Carrie. I was not going to allow that individual to leave with her. You would have done the same." Pete shook his head and proceeded inside. He retrieved his laptop and an overnight bag, indicating his intention to take some time for reflection. Upon his return, Brian, Carrie, and Lily were no longer present, and Joan appeared to be in a state of shock. Pete inquired as to the plan of action regarding the individual in question, suggesting that he required guidance in manners. Joan responded with skepticism, indicating her belief that Pete was not the appropriate person to address the situation. Pete was incredulous. He assumed that the individual in question would be enraged. Joan posited that Pete would not be so fortunate in the future. Pete's countenance transformed from shock to fury. "At what point did you lose all respect for me, Joan? Your assertion is absurd. My sentiments have not altered. I am proud of you. I am skeptical. Are you aware that I have been in contact with representatives from Fortune 500 companies who hold me in high regard? It is evident that I am held in greater esteem within my industry than within my own home. The last few days have been a period of significant personal growth and learning. I am unsure as to the exact meaning of this statement, but I am confident that it is not something that should cause you concern. I have decided that Ricky or his father must apologize to me and Carrie by 6 p.m. tomorrow. I will contact the police tomorrow, as Brian and I feel that the matter has reached a point where the authorities should be informed. It is also my understanding that the perpetrator is responsible for the damage to the hood of her SUV. I am at a loss as to why you would suggest otherwise. I still have to work with Andrew, who is aware of the situation. Perhaps you could persuade him to teach his son some manners. Your actions could have a negative impact on your employment status. However, I am concerned about the effect this is having on us. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. We have no further discussion to have. I am going to Brian's house to discuss this further, as Andrew is more likely to listen to him. The situation is becoming increasingly urgent. Pete, please return to the discussion." He ignored her, walked into the garage, and placed his bag in the vehicle and departed, leaving Joan standing there exasperated. This was a departure from Pete's usual behavior. He had never done anything like that before. Driving to Brian's, he decided he needed to travel for work to distance himself from Joan and see how involved she was with Andrew. At this point, he believed she might have succumbed to Andrew, Joan, and Brian. All three parties agreed on 6 p.m. Mr. Pete departed for a hotel at approximately 5 p.m. to work on a project unrelated to the Braves game, which was playing in the background. His mobile telephone rang. He had previously blocked Joan's number in order to achieve a greater degree of peace and tranquility. It was Eva calling. "Hey baby, hey daddy," she said. "Eva here. I'm driving back to the apartment. Are you nearby at Vanderbilt?" Eva shared an on-campus apartment with Carrie and Lily. It was an unusual arrangement, likely made possible by a significant donation from Brian, who was wealthy and well-connected. Pete responded, I'm at the residence, room 413. I'll be there in a few minutes." 10 minutes later, Eva knocked on the door and hugged Pete tightly. "Daddy, why doesn't Mum believe us? She doesn't think I can protect my family." Eva nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry, baby. Perhaps Andrew has influenced her to believe that I am not up to the task." "Do you doubt what Ricky said, Pete?" Pete was reluctant to suggest that Joan was involved with Andrew, but he was also hesitant to let Ricky's words go unchallenged. He was torn between his desire to protect Eva from the truth and his reluctance to tarnish her view of her mother. "Don't worry, sweetie," he finally replied. "Everything will be fine." "I want to believe you, Daddy, but I'm worried," she replied. "Don't be. We'll be okay." She wondered if he meant just the two of them or their entire family. She left shortly after school was starting soon and she had a few days left in her summer internship. The next day, Pete checked his home security app to see when Joan left, for he appreciated the flexibility of running his own consulting company but found it challenging to disengage from a marital conflict by lunchtime. He received 20 messages from Joan, primarily accusing him of being unreasonable. The final message stated, "You win. He'll be there at 6. I left you a voicemail." Pete listened to the voicemail from Andrew, who stated that Ricky would apologize at 6. "At 6 p.m. tonight, I am still displeased with you for placing me in this predicament. We can discuss the matter further after everyone has departed." Pete rolled his eyes as if to say, "It is still my responsibility." He had planned to drive to Louisville that night for a client session, arriving early to complete some preliminary work at 5:45 p.m. At 6 p.m., Brian and Carrie arrived. Carrie embraced Pete and Brian shook his hand. This was an intriguing turn of events. Were Brian and Carrie doing well in their relationship? It seemed like Brian was experiencing some difficulties in his marriage. Brian and Carrie discussed the situation. Brian expressed surprise at the incident, but he also noted that Brian was typically well prepared. Brian suggested that they wait outside for a few minutes. He did not want Ricky in his house. Brian and Carrie agreed. Ricky arrived in a red BMW, his demeanor indicating a lack of happiness. Joan was not present at the time. Ricky proceeded to approach the group and express his regret for his actions on the previous Saturday. He stated that he was out of line and that he missed Carrie. He further elaborated that he had taken her rejection poorly and hoped that he had not irreparably damaged their friendship. In response, Carrie conveyed uncertainty about the possibility of a future friendship with Ricky. "I will endeavor to be amicable and cordial towards you, Ricky, but I am unable to profess any further allegiance at this time. I am aware that you have apologized to Brian, Mr. Williamson, for the incident involving his SUV. Please forward the relevant documentation and we will duly settle the matter." His demeanor seemed somewhat insincere. Mr. Clark's demeanor shifted and the expression of contrition vanished. "I apologize for disrupting the gathering and entering your premises without permission. I recognize that my actions were inappropriate. Thank you, Ricky. I believe we have concluded our discussion." As Ricky walked back to his vehicle, he smirked and mouthed "Kitty" to Pete. In response, he opened his hand, indicating that he required proof. Ricky grinned and drove off. Brian stated that Ricky's apology to Carrie seemed sincere, but not to them. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing of importance, he was merely attempting to provoke me once more." Pete replied, Carrie felt guilty for ever dating. Brian stated that should Ricky require assistance, he would be willing to provide legal counsel for both Ricky and his father. Alternatively, he could arrange for a deputy to monitor Ricky's activities for a weekend. Brian then suggested that they temporarily postpone their plans. Carrie had informed her parents about Ricky's comments about Joanne were met with skepticism. It was evident that Ricky was not a trusted source of information. Brian and Pete shook hands and Carrie embraced Pete, who was about to drive away. Joan's car approached, but Pete did not acknowledge her. He drove towards Louisville, needing time to figure out his next steps. 10 minutes later, his phone rang. He decided to answer. "Hello, Joan, Pete. Are you simply going to the store and returning?" "No. My client requires my presence in Louisville at an early hour. I shall remain there until Friday afternoon." "Why did you say that?" "I only travel every 6 to 8 weeks. If you had been present on Saturday, you would have observed the entirety of the incident. I am disconcerted by your decision to align with Ricky's perspective. I am aware of your actions and express my regret." Ricky did indeed express remorse to Carrie, yet his sincerity was lacking when addressing Brian and me. It is fortunate that Ricky will not face legal consequences as he is still a minor. "Pete, I am aware that you are 20 years of age. A 20-year-old who requires guidance in managing his anger and respecting others." Joan exhaled. "Can we converse when you return home on Friday?" "Certainly. I will miss you." The hour-long drive to Louisville afforded him sufficient time to reflect. He surmised that Ricky was privy to more than just idle gossip regarding Andrew's marital status. Given Andrew's proclivity for extramarital relationships, it was not implausible that he had divulged inappropriate details to his son. Pete conjectured that Joan and Andrew were engaged in an adulterous relationship, potentially even within the confines of their hometown, as Ricky had insinuated. Pete's intention was to travel as frequently as possible, with the hope of catching them unawares. He contemplated the possibility of hiring a private investigator but ultimately decided against it, opting instead to install hidden Wi-Fi cameras in his house. He ordered the installation of security cameras in his house with the expectation that they would be delivered to his hotel on Thursday. However, he was concerned that they might record something that he did not want to be made public. It was a challenging week for everyone. Eva called her father on several occasions to inquire about his well-being. Donnie also called to check on him. Joan sent him text messages and voice messages expressing her love and longing for him. She sent these messages conveniently when Pete was with clients. He was grateful because he did not want to talk to her on Friday. He drove home, dreading what might await him. Joan greeted him in a flattering dress and heels, indicating her intention to go out. Pete was amenable to this, as it would provide a distraction from their current circumstances until they returned home. They proceeded to a local steakhouse, where Joan was affectionate throughout the evening, despite Pete's initial irritation. Once home, Joan immediately initiated physical intimacy, and they did not make it past the family room before she undressed and initiated sexual intercourse. The couple continued in the bedroom, where Joan expressed her love and Pete replied, "I loved you too." Joan, however, missed the past tense. She fell asleep that night believing everything was fine. The following morning, Joan was already awake and drew circles on Pete's chest. She thanked him for the previous night and he admitted it was nice. Then she mentioned that she needed to go to Memphis for a client meeting on Thursday. Pete questioned the sudden trip, but she explained that it was urgent. She asked if he was okay, and he mentioned the revelation prompted another round of closeness, which they both enjoyed over breakfast. Joan inquired as to their well-being and expressed her love, indicating her desire to move past the recent incident. Pete smiled and squeezed her hand, expressing his desire to do the same. Throughout the weekend and into the following week, Joan attempted to demonstrate her love, not merely through sexual intercourse, but Pete sensed the end was near. He installed a GPS tracker on her vehicle and placed hidden Wi-Fi cameras and microphones throughout the house. Cameras and microphones were installed throughout the house. Despite feeling terrible about it, Pete needed to know the truth. On Thursday morning, Joan kissed Pete goodbye. He asked, "Will you drive your car to Memphis or get a rental?" "I'll take mine," she replied. "The company will reimburse the mileage, and I'll be safe." Driving her own vehicle was satisfactory. She was to be careful and to love him. She did so, and he reciprocated. Several hours later, she was not at their Brentwood office or on I-40, as she should have been. Her vehicle was located at Andrew's house. Pete's suspicions were confirmed, his marriage was over. He needed to burn off some steam. He went to his dojo to he engaged in physical exercise and training with the intention of maintaining his mental acuity in the event that he was compelled to confront Andrew. He expressed his gratitude to Joan once more. Subsequently, Joan sent him a text message to inform him that she had reached Memphis without incident, although the GPS device still indicated that her vehicle was situated at Andrew's residence. Pete proceeded to arrange for the services of a private investigator to on Friday morning, he received an email with the subject line "Kitty Bear" that included a link to a cloud account with live and recorded video footage from Andrew's residence. The video showed Joan and Andrew undressing and engaging in sexual intercourse in the family room. Pete then drove to the airport and parked in long-term. He then proceeded to park in a long-term lot and called Joan, leaving a message indicating that he was flying out. He subsequently made his way to the airport Marriott, where he observed the evidence. "Stupid kid," he muttered to himself. Pete did not require further visual stimulation, merely watching Joan's vehicle at Andrew's house overnight was sufficient. He listened to the videos, enduring the sounds of their affair to gather information. The voice of Andrew could be heard, stating, "I know you're angry, but you don't have to reclaim me, Joan. I know I'm still upset about Ricky's apology. You need to control your husband. I've been withholding." She lied, as he had requested. Andrew responded angrily, stating that she should not dictate his actions if she wanted to benefit from them. Joan was tired of Andrew's controlling behavior. She stated that she loved Pete and that he was a good father and husband. She was not willing to give him up. Andrew responded sarcastically, asking why she was having an affair with him if she loved Pete. "I occasionally miss the physical presence of a larger man. It is not merely your stature that I find appealing, I also enjoy the sensation of being with someone taller. When I am wearing heels, I appreciate the feeling of robust muscles. At times, I miss that sensation." Andrew responded by reassuring her that he would continue to care for her, and she agreed. "I will take care of you, but if you are unable to control him, I may have to speak with him. I am still upset with him for sucker punching Ricky. You will not hurt my husband. Do you understand?" This surprised both Andrew and Pete. Andrew was calm, but she was irritated because she did not belong to anyone but her husband. She also requested that Ricky be controlled. She did not want him to sneak up on her. She informed them that he had not done that. She told them that she would handle it. Andrew laughed and said that was impossible. Kitty struck Ricky. Although he was not a kitty, he was nevertheless regarded as such by the girl, who referred to him as her kitty bear. She demanded that Andrew let her handle him. Andrew laughed and replied, "As long as I get to handle you." The second interesting exchange occurred after Pete's call from the airport. Joan Andrew replied that he had been gone for a week. His smile was sinister. "Now we can take a few more days off and engage in sexual intercourse." Joan responded, "Yes, but not if you continue to be so forceful. You will bruise me." Andrew reassured her, "You are not." Given the frequency of their interactions, it is reasonable to assume that he will observe the situation. "He still sees me getting dressed, as you previously stated that you appreciate the teasing." Andrew smiled and suggested that if they engage in sexual intercourse throughout the week, it would be beneficial to temporarily remove him from the situation. This approach has been known to be effective in the past. Additionally, he is not significantly smaller than you. Andrew expressed discomfort upon hearing this information. He stated that he would be gentle, as requested, but only in a different setting. He specified that he would not engage in sexual intercourse at his house or while traveling. Instead, he would do so at your residence. He asserted that he would have sexual intercourse with you in a manner that aligns with your preferences. You previously stated that he would not return until Friday night. Joan was concerned that they had never engaged in sexual intercourse at her residence. "I am uncertain as to the prudence of this decision. If you are uneasy about it, we will not sleep there, only take brief lunches." Joan was initially reluctant but ultimately consented, intending to call Pete every morning and night to ascertain his well-being. This indicated to her the necessity of promptly terminating her relationship with Andrew. Andrew smiled, recognizing that she would not easily rid herself of him. Pete downloaded all the videos from the cloud folder once they departed from Andrew's residence. He intended to delete the server files, ensuring that he possessed the sole copies unless Ricky kindly save them elsewhere. Pete had several calls to make, beginning with Brian. "Good morning, Brian. It's Pete. I hope this call finds you well. I have an update regarding our recent conversation when Ricky arrived to apologize. As it turns out, Joan has been engaged in an extramarital affair for some time. I'm truly sorry to hear this. This isn't a social call, then. I require the services of a competent divorce lawyer. I'll be in touch shortly. I'll provide your details and she'll contact you today. This also sounds acceptable. Please inform Miriam that she should not divulge this information to anyone until I have provided Joan with the relevant documentation next week. I am sorry for your situation, Pete. We have always held you and Joanne in high regard. I am sorry too, Brian. I do not owe you any apology. We have been friends for a considerable period of time, and our daughters have been friends for even longer. I am simply assisting a friend in need. Once this matter is resolved, I would appreciate your consideration of a gesture of appreciation. I understand that you have initiated contact with the Steele family lawyer, Charlotte. I will await further developments." On the evening in question, Joan's vehicle returned to the family residence, and shortly before Pete retired for the night, Joan telephoned to inquire about his well-being. She asked how Orlando was faring, noting that the weather was typical for late August. She then inquired about Memphis and Nashville, expressing that she had returned that afternoon. She expressed loneliness and desire for another Friday night like the previous one. Pete expressed a similar sentiment, longing for the days when he believed his wife was faithful. They conversed for a few more minutes, during which Joan professed her love. She stated, "I love you, Pete." "I love you too, Joan." After concluding the telephone conversation, Pete experienced a sense of sadness, accompanied by a growing anger. As a result, he spent the following day returning to the airport, renting a vehicle, and locating a dojo in the vicinity of the airport, with the intention of avoiding his usual locations for maintaining the secrecy of his presence in the area. He proceeded to engage in sparring and training exercises over the course of 2 days, deriving a sense of satisfaction from his abilities. He then proceeded to send a text message to Joan, who responded in kind. However, an examination of the photographic evidence revealed that on Saturday, Joan was alone at her residence, while on Sunday, Eva visited, which prompted Pete to experience feelings of sadness regarding the imminent dissolution of their family. His sadness, however, soon gave way to determination. He reflected that one must simply accept the challenges that life presents. On Monday morning, Pete received an unexpected call from Brian. Pete considered his family and his future plans while acknowledging that Joan would never be his wife again. It would be beneficial for the children if she were to end her relationship with Andrew. He agreed, but noted that the damage was already done. However, it might make life easier for everyone. Brian replied, "I understand." By Monday afternoon, Charlotte had prepared the divorce papers. That night, Joan called Pete, expressing her love and longing for him. He reciprocated her feelings. Donnie also called. Pete and Eva conversed at length, during which time Pete surmised that Eva was aware of the situation. However, Donnie was to be kept in the dark. Pete was displeased. That night, he did not sleep well. On Tuesday, he worked from his hotel. Around lunchtime, the GPS indicated that Joan's vehicle was leaving her office and heading to their residence. His security cameras alerted him to 2 cars entering the driveway. Pete was prepared to drive home, expecting the process to take several hours. It was approximately 2 p.m. Joan suggested that they should return, as people would likely begin to search for them. Andrew responded that there was no need for concern, as he was the proprietor of the company. Consequently, nobody would question his actions. However, he acknowledged that others might speculate about him. He did not want anyone informing his husband about the situation. Furthermore, he questioned whether the husband would remain loyal to his wife in the absence of romantic interest. Andrew believed that forgiveness might be possible for a single transgression, but not for an extended period. 3 years is a relatively short period of time, and it is possible to maintain a relationship with minimal risk. However, the last few weeks have been particularly risky. Andrew felt that he should return to the office, and he smiled, thinking about Ricky. Andrew believed that Ricky was aware of the situation and may even have been involved. Joan was a competent employee, but she was replaceable. Andrew felt that he had control over her, and he was confident that she would not risk making accusations. He listened to their activities via the Wi-Fi, which was located down the street. The audio surveillance had revealed that the illicit relationship had been ongoing for 3 years, intensifying Pete's rage. He promptly inspected the security system to ascertain whether any alarms or chimes had been triggered. Stealthily, he ascended the stairs, hearing Joan's pleading voice. "Andrew, I need to get back to the office," she said. Pete then entered the bedroom and declared, "That means get the hell out." Joan was taken aback and hastily covered herself. She attempted to cover herself and exclaimed, "Pete, I thought you were in Savannah. This isn't what it looks like." Pete replied, "Joan, that's the most absurd thing I've ever heard." She states that she loves him, yet it is evident that her primary interest is in the physical intimacy they share. He responds by asserting that this is not true and that her affections are not sufficiently strong to prevent her from seeking physical intimacy with him. She becomes distressed, and he responds by suggesting that perhaps he should administer another lesson to her. "Engaging in sexual intercourse with my wife, or do you wish to take your best shot at me?" Andrew threatened. "I am going to punch you until you pass away in your own house in front of your wife." She desired a superior man, a bigger and better man. "Yes, yes, get dressed and meet me in the backyard. I do not want you unclothed when the ambulance arrives." Andrew retrieved his pants as Pete laughed, and he pointed at his member. "Joan, you traded me for that baby carrot. You might have wanted a taller man, but you didn't get a bigger one." Actually, Andrew was a little bigger, as Joan described. However, no man likes being laughed at about his size. Pete wanted Andrew angry. Pete left the room, not waiting for them. Joan cried harder, seeing Andrew. Joan pursued her husband, attempting to scratch his shoulders and back. However, Andrew deflected her attack, striking her with his hand and forcing her against the headboard. This action rendered her momentarily incapacitated. Pete, unaware of Joan's actions, proceeded downstairs. He was keen to prevent the destruction of his home and therefore inserted a mouthpiece before rapidly exiting the house and entering the backyard. Andrew followed closely behind. Andrew taunted, "I'm going to enjoy punching you, Pete. Afterwards, I'll have sexual intercourse with Joanne by the swimming pool so you can observe." Pete, speaking around the mouthpiece, replied, "I don't care if you have sexual intercourse with her. She doesn't matter to me anymore. This is to teach you not to have sexual intercourse with married women. Pete observed that Andrew's arms were large but his midsection flabby, suggesting poor cardiovascular fitness. Pete's intention was to tire him out for the security cameras. Pete kept his hands up to appear defensive, while Andrew rushed forward, throwing jabs and attempting to grab him. However, Pete easily dodged after several failed attempts. Andrew was breathing hard, and finally, Andrew threw a big right hook. Pete then delivered a haymaker, which was effectively countered by a punch to Andrew's right kidney, causing him to bend over in pain. Pete then delivered a vicious elbow to the same spot, which brought Andrew to his knees. Pete then waited for Andrew to stand, needing him to appear as the aggressor for the purposes of the recording. Andrew struggled but eventually got up, trying to box again. Pete, enjoying the sight, returned jabs to Andrew's damaged sides, with each blow causing Andrew visible pain. This caused Andrew to realize that he was the one who was actually the aggressor. Andrew attempted to gain the upper hand by rushing Pete in an effort to grab him. Pete tripped him and then delivered a powerful kick to the groin area when Andrew was on his hands and knees. Andrew cried out in pain and curled into a fetal position, rendered incapacitated. Pete then taunted Andrew, stating, "Who's the bear now? You're lucky I don't drown you in the pool back in the house." Meanwhile, Joan regained her composure and donned a robe before calling for emergency assistance. She informed the operator that her husband and boss were engaged in a physical altercation. She then proceeded downstairs and grabbed her phone. However, she was immobilized when she reached Pete's office. Pete was situated on the ground approximately 10 feet away, listening to Andrew's anguished cries. Typically, he would have been repulsed by the sight of another human being in such a state of distress. Nevertheless, he experienced no such sentiments towards Andrew, except a sense of retributive justice. He awaited the arrival of the emergency services, hoping that Joan had already contacted them. He was preoccupied with locating her, when suddenly, she emerged from the house brandishing a rifle and displaying a black eye. She proceeded to direct the weapon at Andrew, shouting, "You will not hurt my husband, I'll liquidate you." Pete leapt to his feet, attempting to calm the situation. However, he was met with a strong resistance as Joan held onto the rifle with a determined grip. Pete attempted to reason with her, hugging her and pointing the weapon down. He then gently took the weapon from her and placed it aside. When the police arrived, Joan was still repeating, "You will not hurt my husband." The officer removed the shackles from the rifle and checked on Andrew. He was surprised to find that the visible marks were only red sides and early bruises. Joan's black eye. Pete inquired as to her well-being. She replied that she was fine. However, she then began to sob and pointed to Andrew, indicating that he had assaulted her when her husband arrived on the scene. Andrew pursued him. Pete was perplexed. The officer suggested that she should go to the hospital to have the incident documented. Could her husband take her? She replied that she should go as soon as possible. The officer then looked at Pete and inquired as to whether he was injured. Pete shook his head. "Or something. I am aware of how to safeguard myself and my family, yet I am more severely affected than you can fathom." Joan wept on Pete's shoulder, cognizant that she was the perpetrator of the harm he had sustained. Pete escorted her to the bedroom to change her clothes for the hospital. She requested his assistance, but he declined, preferring to avoid the scene of her encounter with Andrew. Joan appeared to have aged significantly as a result of this incident. As they departed, Pete inquired of the officer if they could have his cart. Joan was not in need of it. The officer concurred and they proceeded to the vehicle, where they conversed in silence until Joan requested that Pete address her. She urged him to yell at her, to scream at her, and to call her a 304 once more, but to explain his thoughts. Pete continued to drive, and after a minute, he informed her that he considered the incident an assault. He stated that it would be widely known that the encounter had been consensual. He did not intend to lie for her. Joan's expression became somber. She expressed her desire to leverage the situation to keep him at a distance, citing his excessive control and her intention to leave him in the firm. "I have heard that you have said I am not intelligent simply because I am of short stature. I would ask you why you hold that view, but I already know the answer. I am sorry. The unfortunate reality is that I would do almost anything for you, but I am unable to change what you have held against me for so many years. You should never have married. Please do not suggest that I made a poor decision. We have a wonderful family home and fulfilling careers. We enjoy a comfortable lifestyle. However, I am reliant on men who are taller and larger. Pete interjected, stating that this was a difficult topic. He continued, suggesting that I should have considered the potential consequences of an affair and decided that it was not worth the risk. I agree. Stupid. Can you forgive me? She asked. Pete shook his head. Maybe one day, but not soon. This was not merely an affair. His son had sent him a link to a cloud account with videos of her and Andrew from Thursday and Friday. Pete revealed that she gasped. He did not know whether Andrew had said it or Ricky. In any case, she had heard him. She said, "You won't have to worry about wearing heels around me anymore." It never bothered me. She added, "I wish I had known that." It has always bothered you, he replied. You will no longer have to worry about people thinking that your short husband is an easy target. Do you still believe that Ava fabricated the story about Paris? Joan's almost imperceptible shake of her head conveyed her answer. Oh, and by the way, when Ricky emailed me the link, he mentioned that Andrew had agreed to let. It is therefore unsurprising that he attempted to exert control over her. He had no respect for me or our marriage. It is evident that disrespect was reciprocal. Joan was devastated by the realization that she had disrespected Pete first. She was also appalled that Ricky thought he could have sexual intercourse with her. She now understood why he had been Pete. I am at a loss for words. I am sorry, but that is not sufficient. You have lost faith and respect for me, despite my superior qualities, and that is not enough for you. Is that correct, Joan? Joan looked out the window, tears streaming down her face. What now? She inquired as to whether he intended to serve her with divorce papers that day. He replied that he would wait and see how the next few days unfolded. Despite the fact that they were still getting divorced, serving her with the papers on the day he had supposedly assaulted her would not be advantageous in court. He then asked how she planned to substantiate the allegations of assault. Additionally, he inquired about the rifle she had mentioned. He asked whether she intended to send an innocent bystander to jail. I intended to incarcerate him, but you were just as culpable as he is. Joan felt inclined to leap from the moving vehicle. There was nothing innocent about him. Simply inform the police that you found me in tears in the bedroom and that Andrew pursued you once he saw you. I will manage the rest, so you do not have to fabricate the truth. That is a falsehood, Pete stated. I am aware of that, but I was imploring him to leave. I was certain that tears would have come soon. I have a black eye to prove that he shot me and his skin under my nails to show that I fought him off. Pete said, and do not forget that your inner part is full of his, which will demonstrate that he assaulted you. Joan broke down sobbing. Pete inquired as to why she had obtained the rifle. Together, she said, in the heat of the moment, irrational actions are not uncommon. I was determined to prevent him from hurting you. I grabbed the rifle, unaware of the circumstances that would unfold. When I emerged from the house, I was met with a scene that differed from my expectations. Both parties were aware of the situation. Pete acknowledged her desire to protect him but suggested that she might have considered the potential consequences of her actions earlier. Subsequently, while still in the vehicle, Pete contacted Brian. He informed Brian that Joan and he were en route to the hospital and that they required the services of a competent attorney with minimal delay. He promised to provide further details later that day. Pete expressed his condolences and offered assistance, suggesting that he would make some calls. He inquired as to whether the individual in question would be attending Williamson Medical Center. He assured the person that they would be met at the facility and advised them to remain silent. Until you have consulted with your attorney, it would be prudent to refrain from making any further statements to anyone. Pete replied, "Thank you, Brian." He then terminated the call and turned to Joan. Did you understand that this is a dangerous game? It would be advisable to ensure that your story is consistent before you find yourself in a compromising position. Joan groaned internally at her predicament. Perhaps she should have thought more carefully before she spoke. As Brian had previously suggested, they were met in the emergency room by the hospital administrator and senior legal counsel, both of whom were acquainted with Brian. The attorney was also distantly related. Their primary objective was to ensure that Joan and Pete were seen promptly and not questioned until Brian's attorney arrived. The attorney rapidly grasped Joan's objective. They recorded the full extent of the affair, including the duration, the involvement of Ricky, the videos from Andrew's place, and the Clark security system. Joan was forced to recount these details in front of Pete, who was rendered speechless by the experience. The attorney advised Joan to pursue a settlement was reached out of court to secure compensation and facilitate a transfer to another firm. Given the duration of the affair, the DA was unlikely to pursue prosecution, which would have been perceived as an act of vengeance. Andrew was likely to prefer avoiding civil court and the publicity surrounding the injuries he had sustained. Pete requested a private conversation with Joan. Regardless of the financial terms of the settlement, regardless of the financial outcome of the divorce, I am seeking a 50-50 split of other assets, excluding my consulting business, and no alimony. It may be advantageous to negotiate as much as possible. It is advisable to wait before taking possession of the bed, as it may be perceived as a potential source of conflict. He responded, after what I have observed and participated in, you inquire about my willingness to do what you ask. Consider what I could do with those videos. I possess the contact information for all of your clients and many others. I could send them videos of their advisor violating their vows and demonstrating poor judgment. How many would continue working with you? Asked you, the anger I feel is immense. If the house is the only asset I take, it is a lenient outcome. Each time he said lover, it felt like a red-hot poker. She was unable to deny it. Unwilling to engage in conflict with Pete over the situation she had created, she agreed to receive whatever she could from Andrew following his surgeries. After Andrew's surgeries, Joan received a financial settlement from him. The process took weeks. Following negotiations, a further period of approximately 2 years was agreed, during which time the remuneration would be sufficient to support her. She subsequently secured employment with the investment advisors, Brian and Miriam. The remuneration was less than her previous role, but the position offered prospects within a large multinational firm. She subsequently relocated to a 3-bedroom property. A bedroom condominium was procured in the vicinity of her new occupational position, thereby allowing space for her children to visit. Despite her efforts to move on from the past, nights were often filled with feelings of numbness and despair. She frequently contacted Pete, expressing her distress, before hanging up and realizing that she might require therapy and support from her children and siblings. Her new position was aided by the recruitment of some of her former clients from Andrew. This was a relatively straightforward process, as they had a positive opinion of her and wished to leave Andrew's firm, especially. Following a Freedom of Information Act request, a detailed police report was compiled, which detailed the incident at Pete's house and highlighted the sensational elements that subsequently made the news following his hospital stay. When asked for a comment, Andrew merely stated that it was a private matter. He underwent multiple surgeries to save his kidney, stabilize his rib and partially restore a testicle. There was hope that he might one day achieve hardness, but it would likely be painful and might require Pete underwent another surgical procedure, which represented the most challenging period of his life. He attempted to maintain as active a lifestyle as possible in the following months, including the Thanksgiving holiday. However, he experienced significant physical discomfort on the day of Joan's departure, marking the dissolution of their family. The situation was more traumatic for Eva than the death of their grandparents. She was influenced by Ricky's statements, which eventually became factual. She held a strong resentment towards her mother for causing her father pain and recognized that the recovery process would require time. Despite her anger, she opted to support and attempt to forgive her mother. Eva prepared Donnie so that he would not be wholly taken unawares. He was enraged at their mother's presence, given that he was in his final semester at Georgia Tech. He avoided involvement in the situation and declined to respond to her communications. The circumstances negatively impacted both children's academic performance, despite the fact that Pete had already sold the house and obtained a divorce. However, the 3 sisters intervened to try to improve his mood.